Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Cloud Threat Hunting, Tactics for Enhanced Azure Security. I am Shilpa Sharma, and I will be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Now about our speaker, Poonam Kodag. Poonam is an accomplished cybersecurity professional with 17 years of experience across India, Singapore, and Australia. Her career is marked by a proven track record of innovating and developing advanced security products and technologies. Holding a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Computer Science and Certified Ethical Hacker credential, she excels in reverse engineering, threat hunting, threat intelligence, and leading incident response. As a cybersecurity leader, she has extensive experience in managing and mentoring security teams, establishing comprehensive security policies, and driving significant improvements in incident management. Her career is distinguished by her leadership in global-scale security projects, including securing major sporting events and delivering security services worldwide. As an innovative and strategic thinker, she has contributed to the field by releasing multiple inventions. As a mentor for the Australian Women in Security Network, she is dedicated to nurturing local talent and advancing cybersecurity excellence globally. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Poonam. Uh, Poonam, please unmute yourself.
Hello. Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, yes, please.
Great. Thank you, Shilpa, for the introduction. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone, for those who are joining. Welcome, and thank you for joining today's session. So today we'll be looking into cloud threat hunting, tactics for enhanced Azure security. As more and more organizations migrate toward cloud, the security of your cloud environment becomes paramount. This is where threat hunting comes into picture. And today's session, we will explore more of the intricacies of cloud threat hunting with a special focus on Microsoft's Azure platform, especially the M365 platform. So I will give you a brief introduction about the agenda of the topics that I will be covering in brief in today's session. We will begin with understanding cloud threat hunting. What exactly is cloud threat hunting, why it's important, and how it differs from the traditional threat hunting. Next, we will discuss the critical reasons why proactive threat detection is essential in cloud environment, including the benefits like early detection, enhanced security posture, and faster incident response. We will also examine the various types of cloud threats that are specific to the cloud environment, such as data breaches, account hijacking, insider threats, and insecure APIs, and more. After that, we'll delve into the concept of unified audit logs, and I will explain you why unified audit logs are significant for Azure's threat hunting. We will also cover some key tactics that are essential for Azure threat hunting, such as deep dive into Azure logs, utilizing of MITRE ATT&CK framework, hypothesis-driven hunting, and so on. I will also share with you a case study on a hypothesis-driven threat hunting, where I demonstrate how do you detect impossible travel activity. And at the end, I will share and discuss some of the resources that might aid you when conducting Azure threat hunting. And in the end, I will open the floor for the question and answers. And at the end of this session, I hope you would have a robust understanding of cloud threat hunting and you are equipped with actionable strategies to secure your Azure cloud environment. So with that, let's jump in. Now, what exactly is threat hunting? According to CrowdStrike, threat hunting is the practice of proactively searching for cyber threats that are lurking undetected in a network. So the main goal of threat hunting is basically to identify any suspicious or malicious activities that are bypassed by your traditional security defenses. Now, unlike reactive methods, threat hunting involves actively looking for signs of malicious activity or compromise. Now, with that, let's understand what is cloud threat hunting. Now, cloud threat hunting is a proactive approach where the analysts actively search cloud environments to identify any threats or malicious activity. Now, analysts will analyze the logs which are specific to your, cloud environment, and they will analyze the logs for user activities, system data specific to the environment, such as your AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. The focus is on identifying unusual patterns and indicators of compromise. Now, some of the key elements of cloud threat hunting are log analysis, where you will scrutinize all these cloud service logs for unusual and suspicious activities. You can also monitor user activity to identify any abnormal user behavior that might indicate an account compromise. You also examine system data and performance that are signs of, compromise or malicious activity. So in threat hunting, these practices for the cloud environment especially, they are curated for those particular platforms such as AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, considering their unique architecture and the threat landscape. Now, traditional security measures like your EDR or your IDS, IPS, firewalls, etc., they may not be that effective when it comes to detecting cloud threats. And that is why we do proactive threat hunting, because it helps you to detect and mitigate these threats before it can cause a significant damage to your organization. Now, now that you understand what is threat hunting, let's look into what is the difference between an on-prem threat hunting versus cloud threat hunting. Now, talking about on-prem threat hunting, in on-prem, you have full control and access to the physical infrastructure. You have direct management of the security controls, and you can configure them as per your need. Even when it comes to response capability, you have immediate response capability by doing the changes to the physical and the infrastructure and networks. However, in cloud, it differs, because in cloud, you share the control with your cloud provider. Now, I'm sharing here with you a shared responsibility model for the various types of cloud models, such as your infrastructure as a service, your platform as a service, your software as a service, and so on. And as you can see, for the various components, the responsibility is shared between the cloud provider and the customer. Similarly, when it comes to security responsibilities, those will also be shared between the cloud provider and the customer. When it comes to cloud, the customers, they have very limited or no control on the physical infrastructure. So they have to rely on the cloud provider for the security protocols and measures. Same goes for the logs. In on-prem, you have full control and direct access to the log data. Those logs are stored locally, and you have the control on manual aggregation of these logs and management of these log data from the various sources that you have configured. However, in cloud, the control is again divided between the cloud provider and the customer. When it comes to logs, excuse me, when it comes to logs, you have to consider how these logs are stored properly in the cloud and what kind of logs are enabled in the cloud, because they play a very vital role when it comes to threat hunting in the cloud. Logs are managed within the cloud environment. Often they require cloud specific tools for access and analysis. Excuse me. Cloud also offers you a centralized logging services, which will aggregate these logs from different sources into the cloud environment. So that's one benefit of moving to the cloud. The cloud tools and on-prem tools for threat hunting also differ vastly. when it comes to tools, you rely on the on-prem EDR, IDS, IPS, firewalls, local databases, and application logs, and you aggregate them using any of your SIM tools. However, consider that because you're on-prem, you have to do manual installation, maintenance, and integration of these multiple tools to cover the different security aspects. This differs in cloud. In cloud, you can utilize the multitudes of cloud native tools such as AWS CloudWatch, AWS Guard Duty, Microsoft Defender, Google Chronicle, etc. Now, all these tools, they are designed to integrate seamlessly with the cloud environment, and they provide you with advanced threat detection capabilities. Automation. Threat hunting has to be automated. Threat hunting process is one of the process that requires automation. And when it comes to automation, the automation on-prem also differs from the automation in cloud. In on-prem, it requires manual integration and configuration of these tools to work with your custom scripts for automation. Even the customization and scaling of this automation solutions can be complex in on-prem because it requires a lot of resources for you to set up, so it can be scaled accordingly. While in cloud, you can use the integrated ecosystem which comes with built-in automation that uses AI and machine learning. Cloud platforms such as AWS Lambda, Azure Sentinel, Azure Functions, they make it easier for you to automate these threat hunting processes. The scalability and flexibility of automation solutions are enhanced by the cloud services' inherent capabilities. And these are some of the things for you to consider when you are moving to the cloud threat hunting. Now, cloud threats. To effectively conduct the threat hunting in the cloud, it is very essential to understand what type of threats are specific to the cloud environment. Here, I have mentioned some of the top threats that you can usually see when it comes to cloud. One of the most common threat is data breaches. Now, data breach can be caused by misconfiguration, data corruption, or inadequate backups. They often result in some unauthorized access to sensitive information. Now, let me give you an example. So, for example, I'm doing a threat hunting and I see that there are some unusual accesses to a storage bucket which was left for public access. And now, identifying this kind of accesses to a publicly accessible storage bucket, which might contain sensitive information, I have identified a misconfiguration in our environment. I go and mitigate and fix the configuration, and that way I will mitigate any future, data breaches for my organization. Similarly, account hijacking. Now, hackers, they gain control of accounts through phishing, pretexting, or easy registration systems. Now, these compromised accounts can be used by the threat actors to launch any future attacks as well. So, when you want to start threat hunting, you are considering some accounts that are compromised, you can start looking into some suspicious login activity. Let's say we start looking into a user account where multiple login failures are followed by a successful login activity from a location which is unknown. And that way you can lead it to the identification of a bigger phishing campaign that was targeted towards your organization. This way you are prepared to mitigate this threat before it becomes a widespread threat and it can cause a significant damage to your organization. DDoS attacks. We are all very familiar with DDoS attacks. So DDoS attacks, they can cause slowdowns, halted operations, and loss of customers. These attacks, they overwhelm your cloud services, making them unavailable to your legitimate users. Another threat is insider threat. This is very common for both on-prem and cloud. Insider threats, they can come from your current or former employees who have access to sensitive data, and these can give you an unauthorized access to sensitive data to someone who who has these credentials, and those resources are misconfigured. Insecure APIs. APIs that are not securely configured can expose business sensitive information. Exploiting insecure APIs can lead to unauthorized access and data breaches. Misconfiguration. It's a very common thing in cloud environment because cloud security settings, they are often misconfigured, which can lead to data breaches and unauthorized access. The next point of unauthorized access just reiterates the same thing that I just mentioned before. Cloud crypto mining. Cloud crypto mining is one of the sought after action on objectives by most of the threat actors. The attackers, they target cloud computing resources to perform crypto mining without the knowledge or consent of the cloud provider or the owner of the resource. This can cause the owner of the cloud environment to gain huge losses in terms of the charges which are caused by the crypto mining resources. For example, Team TNT is one such threat actor that uses cloud crypto mining as one of its action on objectives. Now let's look into some of the threat actors which are actively exploiting the cloud environment. If you guys have heard about solar winds, which caused waves a couple of years back, where this was a nation state threat actor that was targeting Azure cloud environment with very sophisticated techniques. Very recently, Scatter Spider is one such threat actor that is a financially motivated threat actor and is responsible for 29% of all the cloud-based intrusions. If you remember the MGM attack that happened start of the year, where it just shut down the entire casino environment for MGM. Cozy Bear is again a Russian state nexus adversary that often targets Azure services for data theft. Now that you understand the cloud threats, let's quickly touch upon the importance of cloud threat hunting. Now, on an average, it takes less than 10 minutes for cloud attacks after the credentials are discovered. That's how fast a cloud attack can navigate. That's why threat hunting is very essential when it comes to cloud, because threat hunting can lead to early detection of threats. That is, you can identify any missed threats and vulnerabilities. It can also lead to an enhanced security posture because it provides deeper visibility into your cloud environment. You can identify weak spots and you can improve your proactive defenses. You can also gain a faster incident response because now the time between the detection and the mitigation of the security incident is reduced. Threat hunting also helps you to protect against evolving threats. So it helps you to detect new and sophisticated attacks such as advanced persistent threats. And it can also help you minimize your financial and reputational risk because now it prevents you from the financial losses by stopping these threats before they can exploit these vulnerabilities. And you can also reduce the risk of reputational damage that is caused by the data breaches. Now that you know why it is important, let's delve into the unified audit logs, which is very important when it comes to Azure threat hunting. Now you will ask me, what are unified audit logs? So unified audit logs is a centralized repository of logs from various Azure services and applications. It provides a comprehensive view of user and system activities across the cloud environment. So in unified audit logs, you can see all the different workloads that Azure supports, such as your SharePoint, your Entra ID, your OneDrive, etc. And you can get all the tenant and sign-in logs into your unified audit logs. These unified audit logs are very important when it comes to threat hunting because they facilitate correlation of events across multiple services, identifying patterns and anomalies that indicate potential threats. It enhances the visibility of security incidents, enabling quicker detection and response for you. Now, what are some of the key features of unified audit logs? Unified audit logs aggregates all the logs from Entra ID Microsoft 365, and other Azure resources. It supports advanced search and filtering capabilities for the detailed analysis. It is really beneficial for security teams because it simplifies the investigation process by offering a single source of truth for audit logs. It improves the incident response times with unified and actionable insights. It also reduces the complexity of managing multiple logging systems, thus streamlining the compliance and the reporting efforts. Now you will ask me, but that's all great. How do I access it? And how do I make use of unified audit logs? So don't worry, there are multiple ways you can access unified audit logs. One of the most common way is use your Azure portal, use your security portal, or you can use Microsoft Purview Compliance Center. Now, Microsoft Purview Compliance Center provides you a very nice GUI interface where you can search your unified audit logs by inputting the keywords that you're looking for. You can also specify the time range that you're looking, and that way you can get like a nice graphical interface. You can search your logs, you can get the results, and you can click on the results and you will see an expanded view of those results in the Purview Compliance Center. Similar features are available in Azure portal and the security portal as well. Now, this is great, but how do you automate if you want to do some automation using UL? So there is a PowerShell commandlet, which is called a search unified audit log. Very straightforward. You just provide all the time range that you want to search the logs for. You can provide the various attributes in UL that you want to search for. And you can use this commandlet for any of your automations as well. The last but not the least, you can also integrate with these logs with any of your SIM solutions, such as Azure Sentinel for advanced threat detection and response using the Microsoft 365 management APIs. So there are multiple ways for UL access and usage. I ask you to go and try them out. With that, let's look into the essential tactics for Azure threat hunting. Now, there are some common tactics when it comes to threat hunting, and one of the most common is deep diving into the logs, and in this case, the Azure logs. Now, what do we do here? We will analyze the logs from the unified audit logs before for any high-risk sign-in activity, suspicious user behavior activity, compromised account, unauthorized access, and so on. The list goes on and on. You can create as many hypotheses as you want to look for. You can also utilize the M365 logs, which are integrated with the Microsoft Defender to track any phishing attempts and unusual email behavior. So for example, if you get a phishing email and a user clicks on the link, so you can look into these logs to get that particular event where a user has clicked on that particular link or downloaded that attachment. That way you get like an entire end-to-end detection of the phishing attack for the M365 scenario, that is. The most common threat hunting start point is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I hope you all are familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework because it helps you to map the Azure activities to the MITRE ATT&CK tactics, so you can identify the attack vectors and it can help you to prioritize your hunting efforts. However, Microsoft has provided an amazing resource which is called as Azure Threat Metrics, which has detailed tactics, techniques, and command lines. Now, this is my go-to when I go for threat hunting in Azure, because it helps me to develop hunting queries which are targeting, initial access or privilege escalation, lateral movement, data exfiltration, and so on. It's a great resource to start. Threat hunting is also a hypothesis-driven hunting. So you can formulate your hypothesis based on threat intelligence, industry trends, or your organization's specific vulnerabilities. That way, you can create custom queries to test this hypothesis in your Azure environment. And last but not the least, you can always utilize Azure Sentinel. It's a great tool. It's a cloud native sensor which uses AI and intelligence driven threat detection and correlation. Now, Azure Sentinel ingests logs from various Azure services, and you can create your custom queries and you can trigger automated responses on those queries. How wonderful is that? Azure Sentinel also provides you with a hunting feature where you have pre-made queries for hunting by Microsoft, and you can use that feature for proactive threat hunting. And you can also utilize the user and entity behavior analytics capability that Azure Sentinel has to identify any compromised account. So Azure Sentinel, go for it if you have it. Now, let's look for a case study, which is impossible travel activity. What is impossible travel activity? So, in impossible travel activity, the hypothesis is a user's account is accessed from geographically distant locations within a time frame that makes it impossible for the same individual to have traveled between those locations. Now, that's a mouthful, so let me explain you. So let's say John is seen logging in from India, and then in the next hour, John is logging in from Berlin. In the next hour, he is seen logging in from Russia. Now, how is that possible? Now, there are three possibilities. Either John is a Superman, or he is able to teleport himself, or an attacker has gotten hold of John's account and trying to access his account from these locations. And no matter how much we want these first two scenarios to be true, the most likely scenario is the third scenario where an attacker has gotten control of his account. So if you want to search for impossible travel activity, I have given a two KQLs here, which is the Kuso query language which is supported by Sentinel. So in the first query, we'll look for all the sign-ins for all the users in the last 1 day where the users are signing in more than one city. And if I run this query, I see a user, Hangpim, where he is seen signing in from 6 different cities. Now that triggers my suspicion. So let's look into Hangpim's sign-in activity. So in the second query, we'll look for where Hangpim is signing in from in the last 1 day, and the signing is successful. So result type equal to 0 means this it's a successful sign-in. Now, when we run this query, we see that Hangpim is seen signing from Paris, Toronto, Barcelona, Aubrey, and so on. Now, none of these places are close to each other. So this activity is definitely suspicious. Now, just because it is suspicious does not mean it is malicious. When you run your hypothesis, when you get the results, you will have to establish the maliciousness of that activity. You have to investigate that activity. You have to check in what context that particular user is signing in for these locations. Maybe it's a script which is using Hank's account and it's getting running from all these locations. So you need to establish that context. And once you have established it and identified it as a true positive, you will follow your incident response plan. Now, for this impossible travel activity, there is also another way to detect it. If you have Enter ID protection license, you can get the risky sign-in alert where impossible travel is one of the risk categories as well. So there you go. Try this out when you're at home. And with that, let me share some references with you that has helped me with when it comes to threat hunting and especially in Azure threat hunting. So the Azure Threat Research Metrics, which I mentioned previously, which is my go-to when it comes to threat hunting, great resource, go check it out. I have also shared with you the link to Azure Sentinel and the Unified Audit Logs, so you can get some more overview on what Sentinel is and what UL logs are. Microsoft has created some really good playbooks where they have covered some of the most common scenarios like your password spray attack, illicit application consent attack, and ransomware attack and so on, along with the mitigation steps that are needed to be taken for those particular attacks. If you don't know where to start, that's again a great place to start with and try it out. Azure Sentinel hunting queries in GitHub are again a create resource. Here you have all the queries for various types of techniques, and you can use those queries and customize it to your cloud environment or to your organization and run those queries. So there you go. I hope at the end of this session, you have all the necessary details for you to begin your journey on threat hunting in Azure. With that, I will open the floor for question and answers. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you enjoy your threat hunting. Over to you, Shilpa.
Thank you very much, Poonam, for delivering such an insightful and informative session. We found the webinar very engaging and hope it was valuable for you as well. Before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that this session is in sync with EC Council CTIA program. EC Council CTIA maps to many roles in the industry like threat intelligence analyst, threat analysis and reporting, vulnerability management and threat intelligence engineer, etc. Anyone with a CTIA certification is eligible for 9,000 plus job vacancies globally with an average salary of $100,000 and $324. If you're interested to more, kindly take part in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you soon. So Poonam, shall we start with the Q&A?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Our first question to you is, can you give us an example of cloud threat hunting and what precaution should we take to mitigate it?
Right. So let me go back to the same example that I just mentioned, the impossible travel activity. Now, when you're talking about impossible travel activity, you are assuming that the account is compromised, and then you are looking for the signs of the account compromise. So once you have identified this user, Hangpim, right? He or she is joining in from 6 different cities, and you have established that this user is signing in from a IP, which is a Russian IP, and this IP is also a malicious IP, which is a known malicious IP. So once you have identified it as a malicious activity, you can go and mitigate that user account. So first of all, before we go into the mitigation, you have to do the full investigation of that account, because now the attacker has control of that account. So you need to test if that attacker was able to do any other nefarious activity using this account, or whether the attacker was able to gain access to your other accounts in your environment. Once you have established the scope of this attack and you have identified what systems and accounts have been impacted, you will go and mitigate those impacted accounts by resetting the passwords. You revoke all the session tokens and for those impacted accounts. And then you will implement MFA, because MFA is very important when it comes to securing your accounts. Now, if you're using Android, there is an amazing feature called as conditional access policy, which you can use to secure any suspicious login activities. So go ahead and use that. And if once you have implemented MFA, conditional access policy and everything, you will move into mitigating the devices that were impacted by this. So you will either, rebuild these devices, isolate them, and remove all the indicators of compromise from that device. So these are some of the most common steps that you will take to mitigate that threat. But again, it depends upon the scope of the threat. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Poonam, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, could you please talk about Azure Logic Apps?
Right. So Azure Logic Apps is one of the feature of Azure collaboration tools, just like your M365. What does Logic Apps do is it enables you to create your own workflows. So you guys must have heard about Azure Power Automate. So it's like a codeless workflow where you can create like a step function, which is AWS terminology, by the way. But yeah, So let me give you an example. I think it will be easier for me to explain using example. So in Logic Apps, you can create a workflow where, let's say, if I get an alert on a phishing email which is sent to my CEO, it can trigger an automated response by alerting the security analyst who is on duty in his team's chat, and it will also take some mitigation steps by either blocking that particular IP or uh, resetting the user account or isolating that account and so on. So it's not a great example, but this is how you can use the Logic Apps to automate your entire processes. So it's a great tool. You don't need to understand how to code it and so on. It's a very graphical interface. You can use the GUI and you can just connect the step by step. So if this happens, do this. If that happens, do that, and so on. So that way it works. That's it, Shilpa.
Yes.
Hope it
Thank
helped.
you, Poonam, for yeah, sure. Thank you for answering that question. Our next question to you is, what are the most common blind spots in Azure cloud security that threat hunters should address?
Right. Misconfiguration. Misconfiguration is way more common in cloud environment as than you can imagine. A lot of the times, what happens is uh, when you are a developer, like developers, they will create some VMs for their testing and so on, and then they will let the uh, firewall rules to default rules, right, which can lead to some open ports that can lead a threat actor to access your environment. So for example, let's say you create a VM and it has the RDP enabled, and you forgot to block this RDP port, and then any threat actor in the world can access that VM. And once the threat actor accesses that VM, the threat actor can move laterally, gain new privileges, more privileges, and do further action on objectives. So that's, I think, misconfiguration is one of the most common uh, you know um threat attack, I would say, vector for cloud environment. And what do threat hunters have to do is you need to create hypotheses that can test these misconfigurations. Like you need to test which storage buckets are publicly accessible, right? Like, do you see any unusual accesses to your storage bucket? Do you see any suspicious port activity on your virtual machines and so on? Do you see when it comes to SharePoint, right? Let's say SharePoint. Now you are sharing some files which are publicly accessible. Then you will look into the SharePoint logs and you will see whether you are seeing uh, any anonymous logins or anonymous accesses to these files that you have, which might be very sensitive for you. So that way you build your hypothesis, you test it out, and once you identify this misconfiguration, you go and mitigate them. Over to you, Shilpa.
Thank you, Poonam, yeah, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, how to detect these malicious IP addresses?
Right. So there are various ways to detect malicious IP addresses. A lot of OSN tools can be used. As you abuse IPDB is one of them, where you can put your IP address and you can see whether it is known malicious. You can use Virus Total to identify whether it's a malicious IP address. A lot of OSN tools you can use, but Microsoft, if we are talking specific about Microsoft universe, let's say, um, in Sentinel or in intra ID protection license, you get that intelligence inbuilt with your alerts. So all these alerts, they are enriched with Microsoft intelligence about that IP or domain and so on. So if an IP is detected by Microsoft intelligence as a malicious IP, you will get an alert saying, oh, you have seen a suspicious sign and activity from a malicious or known malicious IP. So there you go.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Poonam, for
over to
answering
you,
that
Shilpa.
question. Our next question to you is, how is Azure Sentinel different from Splunk?
Well, um, so Sentinel is SIM and SOAR. Basically, they are almost same. Splunk also has the SOAR capability and all. I think it differs in, I will say, more or less the same. Yeah, it just differs which one you prefer. Sentinel is very much integrated into your Microsoft universe, and you have a lot of, pre-made queries and stuff that you can just like out of the box, you can start doing your threat hunting. So if if you don't know where to start, Sentinel is a great place to start with. I use Splunk, and yeah, I don't have any problem with that. So it's just based on what do you prefer and which, to be honest, which tool your organization is can afford. So that's, there you go. Like, yeah, it's again, it comes to the preference of your organization.
Thank you,
Would
Poonam,
you?
for answering that question. Yes. Next question to you is, what are the key indicators of compromise for containerized application running in Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS?
Right. So when it comes to containerized environment, it's a bit difficult because containers are very short-lived, and you can't have your ADRs or so on, running in those containerized environment, because most of the time container is gonna run for like few minutes and then it's gonna exit, right? So what you do is you will look for the control plane logs, the Kubernetes control plane logs. Then you will look for, let's say, there is something called as container drift. So for example, if your container has a specified function, and if you see this container drifting from its function, like let me give you an example. So it's a web service, right? It is running in your container, but you see the container is installing some uh, Kali Linux tools that are like Nmap or something, which is not at all needed in a container. Then it becomes like a drifting from its original functionality. And then a lot of the times, because a threat actor is never gonna, even if they get an access to a container, they would want to migrate to the instance that it is running in, right? So they will try to escape that container. Now, that kind of escape you can look for. In that situation, what you will look for is the VM logs. So because the container is running inside your VM, you can check whether the threat actor is escaping from the container, and whether it is trying to um, get any, requesting any metadata information for the instance that is running in, because it's very suspicious, because if that way it can get all the keys and specific certificates and so on for that VM, and use that certificate to then navigate to other VMs and so on. So that way, these are some of the techniques: container drift, container escape, and so on. Yeah. And same
Thank you, Poonam.
applies to any Kubernetes environment, by the way. It's not just for Azure. So yeah.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next question to you is, how do you prioritize threats and vulnerabilities in a cloud environment?
Well, priority of the threats depend upon your organization, because let's say if let's say if it's a financial organization, then you will be prioritizing the techniques and the threat actors that are targeting financial organizations. So similarly, if you have a healthcare organization, you will be prioritizing those threats for your organization. A lot of the times, you will also look into what kind of controls you have in the organization, right? So let's say if I know I have conditional access policies implemented, then maybe I don't have to go and look for each and every brute force attempt that is happening against my org. But if I don't have that, if I don't have MFA, in that situation, the brute force attempts becomes important thing. So you need to make sure which domain your org falls in, what kind of controls you have, what kind of policies you have in your organization, and you also need to consider what are the latest threat actors that are targeting that particular domain. And that way, for those threat actors, those techniques, you prioritize them and then you run your threat hunts.
Thank you, Poonam, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, which tool company have to prefer Splunk, Sentinel, Secure Onyx? From your point of view, which tool will required in future for SIEM?
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't predict the future. So I mean, unfortunately, I may not be able to answer that question, but again, I will say that in general, it again depends upon a lot of the times these tools are management decisions, and it depends upon what kind of defensive depth controls you're using. If you have a proper defensive depth architecture, that then you can identify where you want to put your investment in, and that way you can decide whether you want to go for any newer tools or whether you want to go for a known and tested tools and so on. So yeah, that's all I can say about that.
Thank you, Poonam, for answering that question. We'll take last two questions for the day. Our next question to you is, are there any threat hunter bots, BOTS, to automatically hunt these threats?
Hmm. Threat hunter bots. Not that I have come across, because a lot of the times your data, your org data is very confidential and you should not be using. I mean, uh, it's a bit of a privacy compliance concern when it comes to using any automated app. But if your organization does have your own AI model, which is customized to your environment, then please go ahead and use those AI models as much as you can to automate these processes. Again, I think now that with OpenAI, a lot of these, Microsoft Universe controls are empowered by the AI as well. So you can utilize those inbuilt AI features and use the automated workflows to create your own threat hunting bots. Over to you, Shilpa.
Thank you, Poonam, for answering that question. Our last question to you is, what tactics are effective for prioritizing and detecting insider threats within an Azure cloud environment?
Wow. Insider threats. I think if your organization is using the zero privilege or least privilege model, is really good. But if they are not, you will want to identify high privilege user accounts, and based on those privileges where someone has access to a very confidential data or sensitive data, you prioritize those accounts. You also prioritize them based on um, what kind of uh, you know security controls they have present, right? Like, let's say some accounts may not have MFA implemented and they might be easily exploited, and they can have like access from anywhere in the world. So those kind of accounts you prioritize. And I think when for insider threats is mostly about identifying which accounts have what kind of privileges and which high confidential assets they have access to, and what kind of controls you have in place to protect those accounts. And that way you can start your insider uh, threats. Purview is again a good tool when it comes to insider threat detection. Yeah.
Thank you, Poonam, and thank you again to our wonderful speaker for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audience. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Before we conclude the webinar, Poonam, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I hope you have enjoyed today's session. I hope you have good takeaways from here, and you will start your threat hunting journey, or you can, modify your existing journey for Azure threat hunting. If you have any questions or any concerns or need more information, Shilpa has shared with you the Reddit community link, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions there. So thank you for joining again, and thank you so much, Shilpa, and the organizers for arranging such an amazing session. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Poonam.